Julia Kristeva's concept of the semiotic horror plays a significant role in her theory of language and the psyche. The term semiotic horror refers to a prelinguistic and preconscious space where the drives and bodily rhythms originate. It is a fluid, non-representational realm that exists before the establishment of language and symbolic order. In her essay, The Semiotic Horror, Ordering the Drives, Kristeva explores this concept in depth. She argues that the horror is a kind of proto-language that is characterized by rhythm, movement, and effect. It is a site of non-verbal communication that is closely tied to the maternal body and the experience of the infant. For Kristeva, the semiotic horror is a crucial aspect of the human psyche that is often repressed or marginalized in favor of the more structured and regulated realm of the symbolic. She suggests that the horror continues to exert an influence on language and subjectivity, manifesting in areas such as poetry, music, and the visual arts. Overall, Kristeva's concept of the semiotic horror offers a unique perspective on the origins of language and subjectivity, highlighting the importance of the body and the unconscious in the formation of human experience. Julia Kristeva's idea of the semiotic horror is like a primal, unstructured space of expression that precedes language. Imagine it as the raw emotions and rhythms we feel before we can articulate them. For example, a baby's cries, coos, and movements are part of this prelinguistic communication. These expressions convey meaning and needs, even though they're not yet formed into words. Kristeva suggests that this early, non-verbal communication is foundational to how we later develop language and understanding. It's a reminder that our experiences and expressions are deeply rooted in our bodily and emotional experiences, even as we grow and learn to speak. Julia Kristeva's concept of the semiotic horror is central to her theory of language and subjectivity. Here are the main arguments along with an example. Prelinguistic origin. Kristeva argues that the semiotic horror is a prelinguistic, preconscious realm that exists before the establishment of language. It is a fluid, non-verbal space where drives and bodily rhythms originate. Example: a newborn infant expresses its needs through cries, movements, and gestures before it learns to speak. These early forms of communication are part of the semiotic horror. Non-representational. The horror is non-representational, meaning it does not adhere to the rules of symbolic language. It is characterized by rhythm, affect, and bodily experiences rather than structured meaning. Example: the feelings of joy or sadness we experience in response to music or art can be seen as expressions of the semiotic horror. These responses are immediate and visceral, bypassing language and rational thought. Maternal and feminine. Kristeva associates the semiotic horror with the maternal body and feminine aspects of language and culture. She sees it as a space that is closely tied to the rhythms and flows of the maternal body. Example: the experience of being enveloped in the sound of a lullaby sung by a mother can be seen as an expression of the semiotic horror. The rhythm and melody of the lullaby create a sense of comfort and security that transcends language. Continuing influence. Kristeva suggests that the semiotic horror continues to influence language and subjectivity even after the development of symbolic language. It is present in artistic and creative expressions that rely on rhythm, sound, and bodily movement. Example: the use of rhythm and repetition in poetry or the emotional resonance of music can be seen as manifestations of the semiotic horror. These forms of expression evoke feelings and meanings that go beyond the literal words or notes. Overall, Kristeva's concept of the semiotic horror highlights the importance of nonverbal, bodily experiences in shaping language and subjectivity. It offers a way to understand the deep, primal roots of human expression that are often overlooked in traditional linguistic theory. Revolt and creativity. Kristeva suggests that the semiotic horror is a site of revolt against the symbolic order. It represents a kind of primal creativity and resistance to fixed meanings and structures. Example: the avant-garde movements in art and literature, which often challenge traditional forms and meanings, can be seen as expressions of the semiotic horror. These movements seek to disrupt and subvert established norms and conventions. Intersubjectivity and communication. Despite being prelinguistic, the semiotic horror is also a site of intersubjective communication. It is through these non-verbal expressions that individuals connect and communicate with each other on a deep, emotional level. Example: the shared experience of watching a powerful performance or being moved by a piece of art can create a sense of connection and understanding between people, even without the use of language. Psychic development. Kristeva argues that the movement from the semiotic horror to the symbolic order is a key aspect of psychic development. The acquisition of language and the ability to symbolize represent a maturation process that involves both the repression and integration of the semiotic. Example: as children grow and learn language, they gradually shift from relying solely on non-verbal expressions to using words and symbols to communicate. This transition marks an important stage in their psychological development. Political and social implications. The concept of the semiotic horror has implications for understanding political and social phenomena. Kristeva suggests that repressed aspects of the semiotic can resurface in the form of cultural movements or political upheavals that challenge the status quo. Example: the use of rhythm and collective chanting in protests or rallies can be seen as a manifestation of the semiotic horror. These forms of expression convey a sense of unity and solidarity among participants, tapping into deep-seated emotions and desires. Abjection. Kristeva connects the semiotic horror with the concept of abjection, which refers to the feeling of horror or disgust that arises when confronted with something that threatens the boundaries of the self. She argues that the semiotic horror represents a form of abjection that is inherent in the human experience. Example: the experience of encountering a dead body or witnessing a violent act can evoke feelings of abjection, as it confronts us with the fragility and mortality of the human body. Healing and renewal. Despite its association with abjection, Kristeva also suggests that the semiotic horror has the potential for healing and renewal. She sees it as a source of creativity and vitality that can disrupt stagnant or oppressive systems. Example: the experience of engaging with art or music that challenges conventional norms can be a form of renewal, as it opens up new ways of thinking and experiencing the world. Fluidity and instability. The semiotic horror is characterized by its fluidity and instability, in contrast to the fixed and stable nature of symbolic language. It represents a kind of primal chaos that underlies the order of language and meaning. Example: the use of stream of consciousness narration in literature, where thoughts and emotions flow without a clear structure, can be seen as an expression of the fluidity of the semiotic horror. Embodiment and sensuality. Kristeva emphasizes the embodied and sensual nature of the semiotic horror, highlighting its connection to bodily experiences and sensations. Example: the use of imagery related to the body and the senses in poetry or art can evoke the raw, sensory experiences associated with the semiotic horror. Transgression and boundary crossing. The semiotic horror is associated with transgression and the crossing of boundaries. It represents a space where fixed categories and distinctions break down, allowing for new forms of expression and meaning to emerge. Example: the use of taboo language or imagery in art and literature can be seen as a form of boundary crossing that disrupts conventional norms and challenges the status quo. Animal and primal life. Kristeva links the semiotic horror to the realm of animal and primal life, suggesting that it represents a kind of primal energy that is shared with other living beings. Example: the use of animal imagery or symbolism in mythology and folklore can be seen as an expression of the primal, non-human aspects of the semiotic horror. Unconscious and repressed desires. The semiotic horror is also associated with the unconscious and repressed desires. It represents a space where these desires can find expression in a non-verbal, symbolic form. Example: Freudian slips or dreams can be seen as manifestations of the semiotic horror, as they often reveal hidden or repressed desires that are not easily expressed in conscious language. Temporal and spatial dimensions. Kristeva suggests that the semiotic horror has both temporal and spatial dimensions. It is not bound by linear time or physical space, but instead exists as a kind of virtual space-time continuum. Example: the experience of déjà vu or the sense of timelessness that can occur during moments of intense emotion can be seen as glimpses of the temporal and spatial dimensions of the semiotic horror. Linguistic and symbolic mediation. While the semiotic horror exists prior to language, Kristeva also acknowledges that it is mediated and shaped by linguistic and symbolic structures. Language acts as a filter through which the semiotic horror is expressed and understood. Example: the use of metaphor and symbolism in poetry can be seen as a way of translating the raw, non-verbal expressions of the semiotic horror into meaningful linguistic forms. Collective and cultural dimension. Kristeva suggests that the semiotic horror has a collective and cultural dimension, meaning that it is not only a personal, individual experience but also a shared, cultural one. Example: rituals and ceremonies that involve rhythmic movement or chanting can be seen as expressions of the collective semiotic horror, as they tap into shared, non-verbal modes of communication and expression. Disruption and subversion of meaning. The semiotic horror has the potential to disrupt and subvert established meanings and structures. It represents a kind of disruptive force that can challenge fixed categories and hierarchies. Example: Dadaism, a cultural movement that emerged in the early 20th century, can be seen as an expression of the semiotic horror's disruptive power. Dadaists sought to subvert traditional artistic conventions and question the meaning of art itself. Gender and sexuality. Kristeva's concept of the semiotic horror is also linked to issues of gender and sexuality. She suggests that the semiotic horror is associated with the feminine and the maternal, highlighting its connection to women's experiences and perspectives. Example: the experience of childbirth, with its intense physical sensations and emotional depth, can be seen as an expression of the semiotic horror's connection to the feminine and the maternal. Affective and emotional experience. The semiotic horror is closely tied to affective and emotional experience. It represents a realm of raw, unfiltered emotions that are expressed through bodily sensations and movements. Example: the experience of being moved to tears by a piece of music or art can be seen as an expression of the semiotic horror's affective power. These emotional responses bypass rational thought and tap into deeper, more primal layers of the psyche. Artistic and creative expression. Kristeva sees the semiotic horror as a source of artistic and creative expression. It is the wellspring from which artists draw inspiration and through which they create new forms of meaning. Example: the improvisational nature of jazz music, where musicians respond to each other's cues and create music in the moment, can be seen as an expression of the semiotic horror's creative potential. The body as site of expression. The semiotic horror is closely connected to the body as a site of expression. It is through the body that the semiotic horror is articulated, whether through gestures, movements, or vocalizations. Example: the use of dance as a form of expression can be seen as a manifestation of the semiotic horror's connection to the body. Dance communicates meaning and emotion through bodily movements and rhythms. Sensory perception and experience. The semiotic horror is rooted in sensory perception and experience. It is through the senses that the semiotic horror is experienced and expressed, whether through sight, sound, touch, taste, or smell. Example: the use of synesthetic imagery in literature, where one sense is described in terms of another, e.g., loud colors, or bitter cold, can be seen as a way of evoking the sensory richness of the semiotic horror. These aspects further illuminate the complex and multifaceted nature of Julia Kristeva's concept of the semiotic horror, showing how it encompasses a wide range of human experiences and modes of expression. Julia Kristeva's concept of the semiotic horror has had a significant impact on literary theory, psychoanalysis, and cultural studies. Its relevance extends to various fields, and its legacy continues to influence contemporary thought. Here's a breakdown of its significance. Significance. The concept of the semiotic horror is significant for challenging traditional notions of language and subjectivity. It emphasizes the importance of nonverbal, prelinguistic forms of communication and expression, highlighting the role of the body, emotions, and unconscious processes in shaping human experience. Relevance. The semiotic horror remains relevant in contemporary discussions on language, gender, and identity. It offers a framework for understanding how meaning is constructed and contested, particularly in relation to marginalized or repressed forms of expression. Legacy. Kristeva's concept of the semiotic horror has left a lasting legacy in literary theory and cultural studies. It has inspired new ways of thinking about language, art, and creativity, influencing scholars across disciplines. Contribution. Kristeva's concept contributes to the understanding of how language and meaning are shaped by unconscious processes and bodily experiences. It provides a bridge between psychoanalytic theory and linguistic theory, offering insights into the relationship between language and the psyche. Impact. The impact of the semiotic horror can be seen in its influence on fields such as feminist theory, poststructuralism, and postcolonial studies. It has opened up new avenues for exploring the complexities of human experience and cultural expression. Overall, Julia Kristeva's concept of the semiotic horror has had a profound impact on the way we understand language, subjectivity, and the nature of communication. Its legacy continues to shape contemporary thought and inspire new generations of scholars and thinkers. The concept of the semiotic horror, as developed by Julia Kristeva, has several key features that distinguish it from other theories of language and subjectivity. Prelinguistic and preconscious. The semiotic horror is characterized by its prelinguistic and preconscious nature. It exists before the establishment of language and is not governed by the rules of symbolic representation. Fluid and non-representational. Unlike symbolic language, which is structured and representational, the semiotic horror is fluid and non-representational. It is characterized by rhythm, affect, and bodily experiences rather than fixed meanings. Maternal and feminine. Kristeva associates the semiotic horror with the maternal body and feminine aspects of language and culture. It is seen as a space that is closely tied to the rhythms and flows of the maternal body. Creative and disruptive. The semiotic horror is seen as a source of creativity and disruption. It represents a kind of primal energy that can challenge established meanings and structures. Intersubjective and communicative. Despite being prelinguistic, the semiotic horror is also a site of intersubjective communication. It is through these non-verbal expressions that individuals connect and communicate with each other on a deep, emotional level. Affective and embodied. The semiotic horror is closely tied to affective and embodied experience. It represents a realm of raw, unfiltered emotions that are expressed through bodily sensations and movements. Temporal and spatial dimensions. Kristeva suggests that the semiotic horror has both temporal and spatial dimensions. It is not bound by linear time or physical space, but instead exists as a kind of virtual space-time continuum. Collective and cultural dimension. The semiotic horror is not only a personal, individual experience but also a shared, cultural one. It has implications for understanding collective forms of expression and communication. These features combine to create a concept that offers unique perspective on the origins of language, subjectivity, and human experience. The semiotic horror represents a complex and dynamic aspect of the psyche that continues to influence contemporary thought in various fields.